Hey, Jacob.
Hey there, Melody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. How's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
I'm doing good. So
Is,
nice to get to chat with you again.
is this your house?
This is my home. Yes. So I'm in a old single family home that was built in the 20s and then converted into 5 apartments.
Where
Um,
do you live?
Denton, Texas.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
It's a nice little space. I have my
Yeah,
girlfriend's wonderful decor in the background.
I love
It's a
it.
good place to be. How's
Uh,
life in Blacksburg?
it's great.
Good.
It's raining today. Um, but but other than that, good. Good fall.
Awesome. Well, we got a few folk coming in. We got 13 participants thus far. We have
Okay.
56 registered. So a lot of folk excited to hear the great message that you have to share, Melody. We got Alex, what's
No
going on?
pressure.
Got our friend Ann, PJ, what's good? Laura, great crew. So attendees who have joined us so far, just hang out for a little bit. I'm looking at about 2 till noon Central Time right now. We'll probably get started about 2 or 3 after, just in case we have some last minute folk coming in, and we will get a chance to learn more about Melody and her wonderful book and her message of how, um, we can learn to love where we live. Let me make sure I'm recording this. So Melody, we have this conversation, and then we put the audio into the Strong Towns podcast. So folk who can't catch it live get a chance to listen.
Nice.
Looks like we're recording. Perfect. Melody, how long has it been since you released This Is Where You Belong? When did that book come out?
I think that came it it's been long enough that I have to like really remember.
When did I write that book?
Right. What happened with that? I think it came out the summer of 2016.
Very cool.
So yeah, a little over 3 years.
Yeah.
Um, and it's surprising to still hear from people who have read it and enjoyed it and been affected by it, or to be invited to go speak somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the lifespan of a book is, but it's sort of a sleeper hit, I guess, the
Sure.
kind of book that people pass on to other people, when it's just kind of like that right time.
Yeah.
And it's nice to hear from people who find the book just at that right moment when they need kind of that pep talk.
Definitely. Yeah, because it's a universal goal that all of us share, whether it's, like here in Denton, I've been here for 5 years, and there's a lot of things I love about it, but at times I still need to look back at your little checklist that you added every chapter and make
Right.
sure that there's things I can do to really just make roots here.
I honestly do too. I have to, I have to admit, like even going to different cities and talking about place attachment, there are times when I'm like, man, I've kind of fallen down on the job here. I need to recommit myself. And I've done a little of that lately, and I can talk about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, we are looking at 12:01. So Melody, let's go ahead and get started. For the attendees who have joined us so far, welcome to another episode of Celebrity Ask Strong Towns. We try to knock these out. Melody, you're a celebrity. Don't giggle.
I know I feel a little like uncomfortable with that word, really, but I will take it.
Celebrity in
You
the,
want to
in
give it
the
to me?
eyes of Strong Towns.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And
Thank
our
you.
wonderful readers and members.
Thank you.
So we try to knock out a few of these throughout the year. Just give a chance for people who we as Strong Towns love to share their message. And if you're joining us live, if you hover over your Zoom window, you'll see a button at the bottom of the window that says Q&A. As Melody is sharing her message and questions come to mind, please click that button and share it with us. Melody will be overjoyed to do the best that she can to answer them.
Yes.
And again, this is a universal goal for all of us. So whatever obstacles that you may be facing to love where you live or inspiring your peers to love where they live, please ask us. Please ask Melody. She has a great message that she would love to share with all of you. So let's go ahead and get started. Melody, Overjoyed to be chatting with you. You are the author of undoubtedly one of my most favorite books, and that is This Is Where You Belong. Finding home wherever you are. There's our dear friend Melody on the back. Fantastic book, all about teaching people, whether it feels natural to love the place that they're at or need to take an extra step, to love where they are, whatever phase in life that they're at. Overjoyed to be chatting with you, Melody. To get us started, I would love to learn, what were you experiencing in your own life that inspired you to write this book?
I was experiencing that exact moment of feeling like I wasn't sure I loved where I lived. My family had just moved from Austin, Texas to Blacksburg, Virginia, which is a town of about 43,000 in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a place that people love, small town. And it's beautiful here, but it was so different from anything that I had experienced. I think that culture shock really hit me, of being in a place that was kind of Southern and people talked in different accents. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't know my way around the town. It was just that feeling of being new, which we all have from time to time, and it can be really uncomfortable. And this thought crossed my mind because my family had moved to a few places. It was our fifth state in about 13 years. The thought crossed my mind, well, like we gave it a little college try and it's not working, so let's just move on. I always had this idea in my mind that there was another place that was better, some magical Shangri-La destination where if I just found the right place that was the best fit for me, everything would be different. All my personal problems would be fixed. I'd start, doing yoga and volunteering more and being a better person. And
it's so totally understandable.
Right. Yeah. I think we all kind of indulge in that feeling of like, we're going to find the one thing that's going to fix us. And that's going to solve all our problems. And so that was me with places, just imagining that I just had to find the right town and everything would be better. And so every time I moved, I kind of had this narrative that I would create in my mind. Like for Blacksburg, it was, I'm moving to Mayberry. This is a small Southern town. It's going to be like this quaint experience. I'm going to get to know all my neighbors and we're going to like borrow sugar from each other. It's gonna be great. And then I got here and I was like, oh, that was completely wrong. And so I immediately was like, okay, misjudge that, but let's just find the next town, move on and start over somewhere else. But realistically, you can't always do that. My husband had just started this new job at Virginia Tech and my kids were in this new school. And I had to find a way to feel at home where I already lived. Instead of thinking that a different city would solve my problems, I had to figure out how to make this home, this place where I had landed. So that kind of started the whole ball rolling with thinking about this process of falling in love with my town and then turning it into a book, mostly because I knew so many people had the same problem. I just had lots of friends who were really mobile and moving to different places. And I knew that it was something that a lot of people struggled with, how to connect with a place, whether it's new or old. And there weren't a lot of resources available.
Yeah. And Melody, I totally empathize with that narrative fallacy, as I'm sure many of our viewers do as well. I know one that I fall into a lot. There's a particular brewery in Los Angeles called McKellar, and they have a McKellar running club. And I'm following them on Instagram. I'm like, oh, I would love to do this. They run every Saturday morning. Looks like a blast. When I have one literally a block down that does the same thing that I don't participate in. but I'm with you. We picture ourselves participating in things when, who knows, there's something likely comparable down the block from you.
Right. It's kind of like the same thing that makes us think that like a year from now, I will be happy to, take this meeting or, take on this project. Not now. My life right now is not going to accommodate that. But, it's like the future self is always some vastly different person
Sure.
than who we actually are. It is an interesting little Jedi mind trick that we play with ourselves.
Yeah. I totally agree. And you have this really compelling stat in the book, Melody, where you say, I got it here written next to me, the average American moves 11 times in their lifetime. So imagine as you're sharing your story of the moves you've made, maybe listeners as well, thinking that, golly, I'm sure I've moved a lot. It is something that a lot of us have experienced in the United States. Why do you think we've gotten to this point of continually trying to seek that next spot?
It's really funny because when I started writing the book, I was like, as someone who grew up in the same town, I grew up in a town called Fullerton in Southern California, never moved a single time the first 18 years of my life. So by the time I was an adult and I was like, man, I've lived in 5 states. This is crazy. Then when the book came out, I started meeting people who were like, I've moved 20 times,
Wow.
30 times. I met someone who was my age in her early 40s. She had moved 40 times.
Goodness.
So it's almost an epidemic of mobility. And,
Sure.
to be realistic, I think we all kind of have that restlessness in us, that we feel like in order to really take advantage of, what our world has to offer, we do want to try new places and experience new things. I think lots of times to be upwardly mobile, we feel like we need to be physically mobile, that we need to be moving and chasing after jobs and different opportunities. And I think there's also an interesting stigma attached to people who don't move. One Onion headline that I mentioned in the book was like, 30 something man still lives in his hometown. And an for all the people who are moving, 11 times, about 12% of Americans move every year. A third of Americans still live in their hometowns.
Yeah.
And maybe that's still live like they never moved, or maybe that's they moved and came back. But there is a surprisingly large portion of Americans who don't fall into this mobility pattern of chasing new places to live, where they just have decided on the life that they have. And that really intrigued me as I discovered. I tell a story in the book about not long after moving to Blacksburg, I got a writing assignment from Reader's Digest, and it took me to West Virginia, a place that I had never been before. And I met with a woman named Gertie Moore, who was kind of showing me around her town. And she said, let's start by driving to the top of my street. And she showed me I have lived on this street my entire life. Here's the house where I lived when I was a little kid, and here's where I lived when I got married. And it was literally the same street, different houses, same street. And at the time I was like, man, that is so sad. Like, here I am, I've just moved to this new state, and this woman, she's never left her street. How depressing is that? And then she started showing me around her town, and she'd been the school bus driver there for 40 years. So she knew everything about the town, everyone, every house we passed. She knew the story and the family that went along with it. She had all these connections in town, relationships with people, really good friends. And by the time I left a couple days later, I was like, she has it figured out. Gertie's the one who knows what's up. And she has created this really rich, meaningful life for herself in small town West Virginia. And the kind of life that other people in big cities like me at the time, look down on and think, gosh, that's depressing. But it was a good life.
Yeah.
And it started making me think, well, what does she have that I don't have?
I imagine it's challenging, in the age of Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, where it becomes more challenging to, trust your own priorities for a kind of place that you want to live in. I would think, I've been in Denton for 5 years now, went to university here, grew up 20 miles away. Sure, like living in LA, New York, maybe these more sexy cities would be nice. It would look good. I may have some, temporary boosts. But really, like, what I love is like the soft connections I have in Denton. I love Sean down at Midway Mart, where I can walk in and he can say what's good, and I buy a Kit Kat and a LaCroix. Like these small priorities that we all have, we likely find in our place. But I'm with you. It can be challenging whenever, like you said, the physical move can be a sign of progress for a lot of folk.
Right. And I think, like you said, with social media, you're seeing people live what seem to be these really enticing lives in other places. And I think, there's always a part of you that thinks, well, I don't have a real life unless I'm living in New York or San Francisco or LA or something like that. There's something fundamentally less important about living in a small town or in a small city.
Yeah.
And that's just not true. I think you can have a great life in those big cities, but I think you can also have a great life in small towns and small cities, and in some ways a more meaningful and connected life too.
Yeah. I love that, Melody. And folk, if you're just joining us, we got Melody Warnick. I'm going to show the book again. Author of This Is Where You Belong, Finding Home Wherever You Are. If you have any questions for us as we're going through the webinar, at the bottom of the Zoom window, click Q&A, share that question, and we will pass it along to Melody. So Melody, I want to talk about, say someone moves to a new place. No matter how many great amenities it has, no matter how much those amenities align with their lifestyle, we find oftentimes that we can't just love a place, right away, just like that. Why is that after a move, it does take some extra efforts to actually have that place attachment?
Studies show that place attachment peaks about 5 years after you move to a new place.
5 years?
Think, yeah, right, which is like really, really sad. And I think the key word here is peaks. I don't think it takes 5 years to develop place attachment. I think you can be happy in your town relatively quickly in some instances. I think there are a couple reasons why you might not instantly feel a sense of attachment to the place that you have just moved to. First is that as I was researching place attachment, which is this idea of the emotional bond that we develop with the place that we live, I came to realize that the number one factor in developing place attachment is really forming meaningful relationships. So those don't happen instantly in a place. And almost everyone goes through that experience. You've moved to a new town and you are hit with this wave of loneliness. I don't know anyone here. And that's really, really challenging. So, my first piece of advice to people who are new in a town or simply looking to kind of enrich their sense of place attachment wherever they happen to live is focus on relationships, focus on forming meaningful friendships, which is easier said than done. Yeah. It's a tall order to walk into a new town and develop strong friendships. And there's a lot of ways you can go about it, joining meetup groups or clubs or doing sports or, simply getting to know your neighbors, approaching people. So because we lack relationships in places that are new to us, that can make us feel kind of disconnected in a place as we form relationships, and even kind of those loose tie relationships of, hey, I've seen this checker at the grocery store 5 times. I feel like, we got something going on here. Those can make us feel kind of more enmeshed in the place where we live. I think the second part of it is that place attachment develops with experiences. It's not enough to simply look around and be like, this place is beautiful. It looks like there's fun things to do. It's actually creating kind of the web of memories and experiences that make that feel meaningful for you. That's how we create meaning, is not just kind of knowing about a place abstractly, but having actually experienced things there.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I did when I moved to Blacksburg and decided, I need to feel better about this place, I want to kind of fall in love with it, was I walked more. And walking is interesting because it turns transportation into experience. That you're doing something fairly practical, just moving around, but because it's so slow, because you have a chance to interact with people, it becomes this experience that I call it putting pins in your mental map. If you imagine like a map of your city and you put a pin where interesting things have happened, or where you went for dinner or whatever, the more of those kinds of things that you can make happen in your community, the stronger your place attachment becomes.
I love that, Melody. And for some folk who, make a move, say they're, big fans of local music, they happen to move to Austin, where it's maybe easier to start to love where you live. For I imagine a huge part of the population, yourself included, with your move to Blacksburg, suddenly you're surrounded by folk who are maybe into stuff that you're not so much into.
Yeah.
Say like you move to Portland, Maine, and you don't really mess with the shellfish. I imagine that would be challenging. Could you give us an example of what that was like for you? Because this is a very powerful part of your book. I think the quote is, like, if you want to love where you live, you have to act like someone who loves where they live. What was that like for you, despite being in a new environment where perhaps the amenities didn't align with your immediate interests? What was that like, just doing your best to just try to get into it? And what kind of rewards followed from that?
Yeah, I think the last time we talked, we spoke about the lack of tacos in my new community. I had moved from Austin, which is sort of famous for amazing Mexican food. And I came to this town and was like, oh, we don't have that now. Oh, dang. So I kind of took a little bit of a fake it till you make it approach. That there's a lot of research that shows what kinds of activities drive place attachment. But part of what I did was simply look at people that I thought were place attached, people who seemed to have that sort of deep relationship with their place, and tried to see, what are they doing? What kinds of things are they doing on a daily basis, or, a weekly or monthly basis that help create that for them. And part of it for me in Blacksburg was identifying what my town was good at and doing that, even when it wasn't something I naturally loved or was instantly drawn to. So for me in Blacksburg, that turned out to be embracing college football. I will confess, like, I'm one of those people who's like, sports ball, I don't know what's going on. Never had been a fan of football at all. But here was this college town. It's one of those places where, your 6 game days every fall, the town kind of shuts down. People, it's like a really big deal. And the first little bit that I was here, I felt very kind of alienated from that. Just, my town they're tailgating today, like I don't do that. I don't care about that. This seems really lame. But as I pursued this project of creating place attachment for myself, what I did was I developed what I called Love Where You Live experiments. And they were meant to be little kind of micro behavior changes that I could do to change the way I felt about my town. And so in this case, I thought, I need to go to a football game. I don't want to, but this is important in my town. It's something that is an asset in my community. It's a big deal here. I'm going to make it work. So, we found some cheap tickets and we went, and I was totally that annoying person the whole time who was like, what's going on? I have no idea. But there was also this true sense of community, this sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. So in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech, at the football stadium, we're known for when the team runs onto the field, they play Enter Sandman by Metallica, and everyone in the stadium jumps up and down, and it measures on the Richter scale. Like, this is,
Funny.
yeah, it's a big deal. And I would, so I was there and I did this, and it was like I was tearing up, like it was just this moment where we're all here, we're all doing the same thing together, and it was powerful, even though it wasn't something I ever really would have chosen for myself.
Yeah.
So I think when we end up in places where it's like, these aren't my kind of people, they don't have the activities I like to do, like the running club is better in LA or whatever. Sometimes we just have to challenge ourselves to embrace this town, embrace the assets that it has, no matter how weird they seem, and sort of like change our attitudes about it. And it makes you build some place attachment, makes you fall in love with where you live.
Have you found that as you get involved in more of these, active groups in your community, that, maybe a particular advocate for that community is kind of meets you halfway and helps bring you to be a part of this group? Did you feel that, whether it's attending the Virginia Tech game, or I know you mentioned volunteering at the theater? If there's an introvert who wants to feel more attached to their place, but a football game may be intimidating, rolling up solo to a Young Professionals Network may feel a bit spooky. Have you found that just showing that effort, folk tend to meet you halfway in new places?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really, that's one of the hard things about moving to a new town is feeling like you don't have your squad, you don't have the people that make it a little easier for you to try new things. So, I started volunteering at the local historic movie theater, and it was made easier because I had met the woman who runs the theater, and she kind of made it a welcoming environment. Welcoming is something that I've thought a lot about. How do we make our towns more welcoming to community members who are new? And I think there's a lot we can do kind of institutionally, things that towns can do to make their cities more welcoming to newcomers. There's a great example in Minneapolis, MSP Hello. They started an entire group that's designed to welcome newcomers and kind of connect them with sort of mentors, people who have lived in the community for a while, and they create events that are bringing these two groups of people together. I think also, there are ambassador programs. I talk sometimes about a program from Burlington, North Carolina called Belong in Burlington, where the city put on this event to invite newcomers to town. And they set up sort of like those high top cocktail tables in City Hall. They wanted to make it feel like a cocktail party. And so they invited people who had moved to the city recently to meet with, representatives of town council and different organizations in town. And it's just kind of like that social entree. So even a little bit of that goes a long way. And I think it's good advice for people who have been living in a community a while. If you've been in your town for, several years, you may feel like I am full up on friends, like I've met my quota. I don't have time for the ones I have. I'm not really going to extend myself for new people, but those new people, they really just need someone to introduce them, to point them in the right direction, to, invite them to dinner or trivia night or whatever. And it has a huge impact.
It almost sounds like, Melody, that these acts of active place attachment almost have a ripple effect in the community. Like, say I look at my community, I'm a big fan of running. It doesn't have a running club, so I choose to start that club. There's likely a few other dozen folk in my neighborhood who would appreciate this new thing that we're creating. Have you noticed that as you partake with different kinds of groups, maybe try out your own love where you live experiments, that it has a ripple effect that inspires other folk to have greater place attachment as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is just that moment where people feel empowered. This guy over here started a running group, and people responded to it, and I have an idea too, so now I'm going to start something. I think a great example of that is Fargo, North Dakota, which I wrote about in my book. And it's one of those places that if you haven't been there, you're like, why would I ever go there? But people who live there adore it. And that's sort of a shift from, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And it really came about with a handful of people who decided to invest in the community. I share the story of Greg Tavine, who was a kid who grew up in Fargo. Like a lot of kids, wanted to leave and never come back. But after a few years traveling around, realized that he was missing something. He was missing that sense of identity that came from living in a small town where everyone knew him. So he decided to come back, but come back with the idea that I'm going to help make Fargo better. And so he started the first Fargo TEDx conference.
Cool.
He brought a program called 1 Million Cups that the Kauffman Foundation does to Fargo. And it created this snowball effect where other people felt like maybe I can make my idea happen. So, a friend did something called an alley fair where, they have these alleys behind downtown in Fargo, and they were kind of sketchy, and thought, what if we put some lights and music and make a festival back there?
Fun.
And they did. So I think having, one or two people in a community who feel empowered, who are willing to take a leadership role in creating change in the town, whether that's with events or clubs or, social activities or, infrastructure or whatever, can have, a true ripple effect in the whole community. I love to go to places where someone young, someone in their 20s or 30s has taken on that kind of leadership role, because we don't always see that. Sometimes we tend to think, oh, we got to wait till the mayor or the town council.
Yeah.
But really, more towns than you think are open to the contributions of your average person.
Yeah, I love that, Melody. And it's a great testimony for, the steps that city leaders can take to make their place lovable in the first place. Perhaps someone, elected official, someone on city staff reads your book and thinks, okay, I want to make my place lovable. I see how it can, help people have greater place attachments, spend their money downtown, generate tax revenue. Therefore, I'm going to build $1 million water park, or throw huge tax subsidies to have some kind of convention center here. But it sounds like from what you're explaining, there are people in our communities who already love where they live, but maybe just from the city, they need just that nudge or maybe some resources to help bring their idea to fruition. What have you realized are just some low-lift public investments that the city can make to make their place more lovable? You gave a few examples out of Burlington, I believe. Any other examples of public investment you've seen that doesn't require huge tax subsidies?
Yeah, I think those kind of small, low-hanging fruit can have a huge impact. And I'll share a very low-hanging fruit story from my own experience here in Blacksburg. I talk a lot about the power of getting engaged in your town, that as you do things to engage, to, maybe create something, make something happen in your town, you feel more engaged. That emotion of place attachment tends to follow. So I was talking about that a lot in places that I was going, as a speaker, towns that I was writing about. And I realized that I wasn't actually walking the walk in my own town. I had let it go for a little while. You just get to that point where you're busy, and this kind of sinks down on the list. So a couple months ago, I happened to be on the website of an Atlanta-based nonprofit called Civic Dinners. I wrote about it very briefly in my book. It's a group that brings groups of residents in a town or a city together, from diverse backgrounds, and basically just encourages them to have conversations, civil conversations. And Civic Dinners was launching a new program called Love Your City. And the idea was, we're going to, launch this out into the nation. We'll have 100 cities participate, and we're just going to bring people together to talk about, what do we love about our town?
Cool.
What do we wish were better? And how can we co-create that in our cities? So, here I am at my laptop reading about this, and, it was like the arrow to the heart was like, I have to do that. So got in touch with Civic Dinners and ended up being the representative to bring it to Blacksburg.
Wow.
So it's happening right now. It's the month of October. I managed to recruit volunteers to put on these dinners, and, people come. I hosted mine a couple weeks ago. We just gathered at an Italian restaurant in town, and for about an hour and a half, just talked about, what do you like about Blacksburg? What bothers you, or what do you think our biggest issues are?
Yeah.
And what do you think will be different or should be different going forward? What would you like to change? And we had the best discussion. I knew 3 people at the dinner. There were 2 that I didn't know at all. And one woman said, towards the end, like, this is what we need in Blacksburg. We need just more opportunities to talk and, connect with each other. So it was this very, relatively little inexpensive thing that I think is having a positive impact. And the way my city supported it is, one of the first people I reached out to about it was a member of town council. And I ended up having a meeting with the mayor and this town councilor. They were so supportive. It kind of surprised me, honestly. I thought that maybe they would be like, we don't have time for things like this. But immediately they caught the vision of it
Cool.
and, said, this is something we want to do. Maybe this will become a regular thing that we do here. They're both hosting their own civic dinners, and we have 3 other members of town council who volunteered to do it. So I think, community members and town leaders can work together. I think when we give that power to town leaders to make everything happen in our community, we're missing the fact that we are co-creators of our communities, and we have power. And sometimes all we need from the actual, city government is support, encouragement, maybe a little bit of money. I've seen a lot of towns do micro grants for community members, which I love. And it becomes a matter of doing this together, which is great.
And I imagine that these gatherings where we're just encouraging folk to have, honest, meaningful conversations about the state of their neighborhoods, I imagine it likely also gives city leaders, just some testimonies of different public investments they could try out. Maybe after joining y'all at an Italian dinner, throwing down some linguine or ravioli, we don't need like ribbon cuttings, task forces, or, master plans to make Melody's neighborhood stronger, to make, I was going to use another theoretical name, but I don't know any of your neighbors. Melody's neighborhood stronger.
Surprisingly.
But they just want us to try out these small bets. Did any of your council people or fellow head officials attend the civic dinner?
They didn't attend mine. They're hosting their own on a different day. So the idea is, like, in the month of October, we're hosting like 15 dinners, and they're all hosted by different volunteers with small groups of people, like 6 to 10 people at each dinner. So it's an actual conversation. So the mayor's hosting her own dinner, the members of town council are hosting their own dinners at restaurants or at their home or something like that. So it's been really cool. And you're absolutely right about small bets. Sometimes those small investments have a very outsized effect on our feelings of love and joy in our town. One of the first things that came up in this dinner about what do you love about Blacksburg was public art. People mentioned a statue that's near our city hall and murals. And a lot of those, I think, weren't even put there by the city. They were just things that people made happen. But it's like Peter Kageyama, who writes about this too, talks about love notes to your city. They're things that are visible to everyone, that are signs that people who live here love this place. And when you see those things in your own town, it makes you feel connected to those invisible people out there who also love your community, and it increases place attachment.
Yeah, I love that, Melody. Where can people learn more about these civic dinners? Is there a URL?
Yeah, absolutely. Civicdinners.com.
Okay.
And I think about 60 cities all across the country have been hosting them, some big
Cool.
cities, some small cities. So this may be happening in your town already, or you can be the one to bring it to your town.
Yeah, that's awesome. It
Yeah.
sounds like the only prerequisite is to, holler at the homies to join, pick a cuisine that everyone has somewhat interest in,
Right.
start having some honest conversations, like to eat.
Putting
Fairly
food
achievable.
in your body and having a conversation.
Yeah, I love it,
That's
Melody.
all. Very simple.
Well, we have some questions coming in. Got one from Stephen out of Athens, Georgia. Stephen, what's good? Stephen asks, I've been trying to put down roots in my city for a few years and have found the ground really hard. At what point do you decide to try somewhere else versus persevering in your current town?
It's a great question. When I started writing the book, I really felt like, if you're place attached, you are going to commit to your community, and you're not going to move. And I've discovered in the process of writing and since then that you can do a lot of things right and still have a hard time feeling attached to your town.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's kind of baffling. But it goes back a little bit for me to the idea that towns have personalities in the same way that people have personalities. And if you're in a city that is a mismatch for your personality, it might feel difficult to make connections there. So my first piece of advice would be to make sure that you've done your part. In This Is Where You Belong, I outline and suggest a lot of love where you live experiments, little things that anyone can do in their town that are designed to make you fall a little bit more in love. I would say, focus on relationship building. There may be your tribe waiting in Athens and you just kind of haven't tapped into them somehow. But I do think that, if you're miserable or feel truly disconnected and unattached, it doesn't have to be considered a failure to move on to another place. And I just encourage people to sort of exhaust their resources, put a little more effort into making the place you are home. And it sounds like you have in Athens, but when it's not working, that's okay. You can move on and use that same skill set of trying to put down roots in a new community.
Thank you, Melody. That was lovely.
It's a hard question.
It is. And Stephen's fantastic, longtime member of the Strong Towns movement, great advocate for building strong towns, especially in Athens. And listeners, if that's one of the several tribes you're looking for in your community, these fellow Strong Towns advocates, encourage you to go to strongtowns.org/local. We have about 85 local conversations across North America. These are people who share similar geography and meet either online or in person to discuss their place and how it can be stronger. It might be the beginning stages of a civic dinner, perhaps.
Right. I mean, part of that is, identifying what about your town isn't working for you. Is it the size? Is it the people? Is it your neighborhood? And also asking yourself, is there something that I can do to fix this? We should feel ideally empowered to make change in our communities. And so is there a problem that you can you can identify and help solve in some way.
Yeah.
Even if you don't actually fix the problem, the practice of investing and getting involved and engaged in working on a problem might give you that sense of rootedness and attachment that you want in a new town. And I think Stephen said he's been in Athens a couple years, 3 years. Place attachment peaks at 5 years.
Just keep that in mind.
Right. Keep it in mind. The good things may be coming. Hang in there.
I love that melody. And at least what I've experienced here in Denton, and a few other folk who lead local conversations for strong towns have, is that really no matter how like fringe your idea for your place is, usually like 2 or 3 people are going to be into it and help support it. I think about Strongtown Sioux Falls, our local conversation, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They throw something called Citizen Taco, where they invite the community to come out, eat a bunch of tacos, and propose an idea that they can accomplish in 30 days and go do that idea. And they had—
Wow, I love that so much.
It's super cool. We had one gentleman at that gathering pitch sidewalk seminars. So he literally just stands in his driveway in Sioux Falls, starts to just discuss a topic. And I kid you not, Melody, and I'll share you some photos afterwards. Folk roll up in their lawn chairs, put them on the sidewalk, and participate in this discussion that they have an interest in. So really, no matter what gap you see in your community, it may not be to the extent of folk sitting in lawn chairs in your front yard, but people are probably going to dig it.
That reminds me of something that probably you've seen in other communities, Porch Fest, which started in Ithaca, New York. And it really was just, I wrote a story about it for a magazine, and it really was just these women who lived in the same neighborhood. And in the evenings, people would kind of come out and they would, play music on their front porch. And these 2 women who were neighbors would always be like, when are we going to have a concert out here? And finally it became like, no, really, when are we going to have a concert out here? And they just, they created a concert series. It didn't start as a series, but it just started as, one concert on one porch. People would bring their lawn chairs and sit on the lawn, and they would just talk. It was very local, but the Porch Fest grew year after year. I think they've been doing it for 20 years or something. And now it's like this all day event with—
That's awesome.
Multiple music acts from all different kinds of cultures.
Yeah.
And replicated in, I think, 100 towns nationwide.
Wow.
But that's something that I've tried to keep in mind doing these civic dinners. The first time you do anything, it's probably not going to be amazing. Sometimes we don't hear about really successful events until they've been around for a few years and they've kind of grown. So it's okay to do something that sucks, like it's okay to have a failure that first time or two, but there's value in just kind of throwing something out there. And yeah, using that as the litmus test to find the people who want to do it with you. Yeah. There was a group in Fargo that decided to just put hammocks up in the public park, and this was like their little club was, like, come lie in hammocks in the park. So there are weird people all over who are probably the same, weird idea that you are.
Well, it's a great reminder of the value of small bets, whether it's small bets to make our place stronger, to make our place more lovable. I think about Porch Fest. If this group of women had this idea but wanted to wait until, the most popular music venue in town could book them a slot, we may not have this live music movement happening, but because they said, we're going to do what we can with the resources we have today, it's become what it has today. That's awesome.
Right. And the charm of it is how homegrown it is. Yeah. So I love that idea that it can just be something really small and local, and that works for your neighborhood.
Yeah. Melody, I have another question from Raleigh. Raleigh, what's going on? Another longtime generous member of the movement. Raleigh asks, could you talk a bit more about the physical spaces that help or hinder the efforts you suggest? So looking at the built environment, what makes it either, easy to do these love where you live experiments, or perhaps a bit more challenging?
The first thing that comes to mind is walkability. Walkable places build place attachment. And so if you live in a place where you can walk, you're more likely to develop a sense of connection to your community, more likely to develop relationships. That has a huge impact. Public spaces also help too. Third places, places where we can be in community with each other outside of our homes are part of that, happy city built environment, the things that make us feel more connected. So you certainly can be place attached if you live in a really rural area, but I think some things work a little easier if you live in, kind of the classic walkable downtown, where it's a little easier to get out and talk to people, attend events, be part of what's happening in your town.
Yeah. And listeners, if you live in the suburbs and feel a little discouraged and maybe no ideas are coming to mind of, small bets you can take to make your place more lovable, we did a recent episode of It's the Little Things with Steve McDowell out of Ontario, London. And it was all about what he called, Melody, fostering micro neighborliness.
Ooh,
so again, just focusing on these small bets we can take. And he had some friends who lived in the suburbs in Ontario. And what they did is, of course, they had a detached garage. And so every Friday morning, they opened up their garage and served coffee. And they've been doing it for a few months now. And now every Friday, there's a long line of folk in the neighborhood getting coffee. A coffee shop down the road is giving them free beans to roast. So even if you don't live in a place where, you have perhaps a very obvious focal point, an obvious gathering place, there's still small bets you can take to try to recreate that in your own place as well.
Right. I think, one of the reasons the suburbs developed was people wanted this idea of neighborhoods that were kind of discrete and identifiable, and that can work to your advantage, even if you are in a not very walkable place. One of the stories I tell in the book is about a woman named Tanya Beeler from Indianapolis who started a thing called Sunday night dinners in her neighborhood with about 10 of her neighbors. And they would just take turns hosting Sunday night dinner every single week. And, it was like this rotating schedule. So when it was your turn to host, you'd pile in 50 people into your house and serve, a huge pot of spaghetti or something. But it created this sense of actual neighborliness in what was not necessarily an inner city neighborhood, just like, that could absolutely work in any suburban place. So I think sometimes physical infrastructure becomes an excuse, like, well, we don't have the walkable neighborhood or the great downtown. And so, we can't do anything here. But I think with almost any physical infrastructure, you can find ways to create a sense of community and love for where you live.
Absolutely. I love that, Melody. Well, Melody, this has been an absolute joy. I don't see any more questions. Looks like folk who want to ask you questions have, and I really appreciate your responses. They've been very thoughtful and helpful, ones that I've made mental notes of as well. So again, Melody, thank you so much. And again, listeners, Melody's the author of This Is Where You Belong, Finding Home Wherever You Are. Fantastic book. You can tell I filled it up with my own Post-it flags.
That makes me happy. Thanks.
Yeah. No matter where you are in your own process of place attachment, whether you already feel attached, whether you need some tips, whether you want to inspire your friends to feel more attached to their place as well. Fantastic book. It is a joy.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Melody, if folk want to learn more about you, learn more about the book, keep up with your writing, where can people connect with you online?
I am at melodywarnick.com and welcome emails, questions. I'm also probably most actively on Instagram, just my name, Melody Warnick, and on Facebook at Melody Warnick Books.
Beautiful. Melody, thank you. This has been so much fun. And thank you, all the members watching live. Thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughtful questions. Y'all make this movie very special, and happy to share this moment with Melody as well. It's been fun.
Thanks so much, Jacob.
Thanks, Melody. Talk soon.
See ya.